Hello students, welcome to Environmental Studies, and I'm going to start this module number 1. So before that, let us confirm the subject code, which is 18 CIV 59. And so now we'll move on to this module number 1. The name of the module is Ecosystems, and I'm going to cover two different topics in this video. So one is ecology. Now first we will see what is ecosystem. So what does it mean? And then I'll just move on to this ecology and what is that term called, and then I'll explain about food chain. Okay, so these are the things that I am going to cover in this video. So let us move on to the first slide. So first and foremost, we shall understand what is the meaning of ecosystem. And before explaining this ecosystem, I want to split that particular word into two: what is eco and what is system. So eco is nothing but the environment, so where we are living in, and how that process and system which is going on. So that is nothing but the ecosystem. The definition of the ecosystem is it is a community of living things that interact with each other with the physical world. So there are many n number of species living in this ecosystem. So there is a different community. So that will interact with each other with the physical world. So that is nothing but the ecosystem. Okay. So it can be living organisms or non-living organisms. So everything will come together and interact with each other. So that particular system is nothing but the ecosystem. So let us move on to this, the different things like the plants and animals with each other, ecosystem interact with each other, and non-living elements of the ecosystems like climate, precipitation, and soil. So here in this ecosystem, so we can classify into two different things. So one is living organisms or living elements, and non-living elements. So for example, plants, animals, so will come into this living organisms, and non-living organisms like climate conditions, precipitation, soil, rock, water, ocean, sunlight, so etc. So all these things come under non-living elements, but still, so this also will interact with each other. So that will also interact with the living organisms. So everything will be in that particular system. So that is nothing but the ecosystem. So ecosystem doesn't mean that only living organisms which will interact with each other. Rather, there are the non-living organisms which will also interact with these living organisms in this ecosystems. For example, sun's radiation, the radiation which is coming from the sun, what does this plants do? So plants will take that radiation and photons, and photosynthesis process will take place, and it will produce food, right? So there is an interaction between these living and non-living organisms. So all this happening in this ecosystem. And for example, so this animals will go and eat the plants, and it will take food from them, and so there is an interaction happening between them. So that is also that will also come under this ecosystem. That means what I'm trying to say is, in this ecosystem, so there will be always a continued reaction happening between the living organisms and non-living organisms. Okay, so that interaction will take place in this ecosystem. Okay, so again, this picture you can see that animals drinking water from the lake, and sun's radiation that it is receiving, plants, animals, and human beings. So everything, everyone, they are receiving the sun's radiation and get benefit out of it. And the drizzle, rain, so that plants which are taking it and making use of it for preparing food. So all these things are happening in this environment, in the system. So that entire system is nothing but the ecosystem. All right, now I just want to tell you, so many of us will think that ecosystem is nothing but the entire universe. So what you are calling it as the entire universe is nothing but the ecosystem. But it is not exactly that. Ecosystem can be as small as the what do you call, the creatures, the insects which are living under the rock. Suppose if you remove a particular rock, so we'll see so many ants, so many insects. So many things are there in the living. So for them, that is the ecosystem, right? And for example, you take the example of ocean, a big ocean. If you go deeper into the water of the ocean, so there are plenty of sea creatures living under the water. So for them, that is the ecosystem. If you go to the desert, so what do you call that, sand, and that other animals, a camel, so which are moving here and there. So for them, that is the ecosystem. So ecosystem need not be a huge one. It is similar to the universe. Rather, it can be so small, right? So that is what the thing that in the first sentence beautifully it is portrayed. Then ecosystem can be very small, such as a puddle or under a rock. So that can be as an ecosystem, but it is as big as ocean and desert. Okay, so in that way we can understand the ecosystem. And now in this ecosystem, so everything should be in balance. Then only the ecosystem will be in a certain condition, in equilibrium condition. If there is any, if it loses the balance, it loses the balance, then everything will collapse. So that's what it says. It talks about the balance in the slide. The balance of an ecosystem is very, very important. So every living creature, organisms are working together to provide a good living environment. Okay, so for example, if there is no water, so if you don't have water, then plants and animals will die, and the ecosystem will not exist. So everything should be in balance. Okay, so if there is any disturbance in this ecosystems, so everything will collapse. It will not run in an what you call normal way, right? So the balance is very, very important in this ecosystem. Now examples. Now let us see what are the examples of ecosystem. So can be desert, Arctic tundra, a rainforest, ocean, African savanna, and swamp. So these are the different examples of ecosystems, and the pictures that you can see over there. So desert and waterfalls and ocean and trees, right? So animals, and under the ocean the creatures are there. So all these things come under this ecosystem. Next, coming to this, the next level is ecology. That study of this ecosystem is nothing but the ecology. That what kind of study it is? It is a distribution and abundance of organisms are living in this system, and the flows of energy and materials between abiotic and biotic components of ecosystem. I am going to explain about what is abiotic and what is biotic. So two different names or terms are there that I am going to explain. So that study, the in detail study of this abundance of organisms in the ecosystem, that study is nothing but the ecology. And now coming to this ecosystem structure, right? The living components of an ecosystem, the roles of organisms in the ecosystem, right? So it can be categorized into three different types. One is a producer, next one is consumer, the next one is decomposer. Right, coming to this producer, so it will make food on its own. So that is nothing but the producer. So for example, plants, algae, so all these things, they produce food on their own. They don't depend on others, right? Right? So that is nothing but the producers. So next one is a consumer. Consumer means eat other organisms. For example, so we human beings, what you call, depend on animals, right? Chicken, mutton, so all those things we depend on other things, and we are the consumers, right? The plants and all will be producers. Okay, that is the what difference between these two. And coming to this decomposer, so this is the particular kind of a bacteria or fungi which will eat dead organic matters. Okay, those kind of things are called decomposers. Producers, we'll see in detail in the other slides. Like we'll see the producers, a living thing that make food on its own, make its own food, right? Examples, plants, trees and flowers, all those things will come under producers, right? So producer is nothing but those are the living thing that can make its own food. So coming to this consumer is a living thing that gets its food from eating other living things. Okay, for example, polar bear eating a fish, a bird eating a berry, a zebra eating grass. So because they are depending on others, so those kind of the animals or living organisms are called as consumers. Now coming to this decomposers, a living thing that breaks down other living things to get nutrients and energy, right? For example, vultures eat dead animals, worms and beetles eat dead decaying plants. So what do? So they eat it up. So first, before eating it, so they break down into small organisms, molecules, and then so they eat it up. So all that dead animals, so that bacteria, that worms, insects, they eat it up, all the dead animals, right? So during the decomposition process, so all those organisms are called as decomposers. Now I am going to talk about what is abiotic and biotic. So any living organisms in an ecosystem is nothing but abiotic. So as I told you in the beginning itself, so in the ecosystem there are living organisms, non-living organisms, and I have told you the example of that. So those are called as abiotic. Any non-living organisms in ecosystem is nothing but abiotic. Coming to this biotic, any living organisms in ecosystem is nothing but biotic. So now we have understood what is the difference between biotic and abiotic. Now coming to this food chain. So food chain is like a kind of a thing that one animal depends on other animal, the same animal depends on the other animal. So it's kind of a food chain, right? So which what eats what in an ecosystem. For example, here you can look at it in the picture. So lion hunt deer, and then the deer depend on plants for food. So it is a kind of a food chain. So depending one animal on the other. So the different types of food chain of an owl depend on mouse, and mouse insect, and insect depends on plant, right? But in this, so we can categorize: one is producer, herbivore, omnivore, and carnivore, right? So producers, plants, we know that plants are producers, and insects, mouse, owl are consumers, but herbivore only eats plant, mouse omnivore both, and carnivore only eat meat. So that is the difference between these four. Now this is the food chain. That food web consists of all the food chains within particular ecosystem. So you can look at it very clearly. So how that food chain, so the entire food chain will form a web, that is nothing but food web. Okay, so we can see the food web clearly here. Okay, this is inside the under the ocean, inside water. So one thing is depending on the other things. So this is all about this ecosystems and food chain, right? So thank you very much for watching this video. So we will see in the next video.